What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Ask a CISSP. So this is the Thursday episode of The Other Side of the Firewall, where we talk about the latest and greatest in cybersecurity news, as well as we highlight those movers and shakers and glass ceiling breakers, those people of color who made it to the other side of the proverbial firewall. Speaking of which, with me today is Miguel Clarke. So this is our second time together. So first time was on The Other Side of the Firewall, but this is the first time that you were solo. So how are you doing today?
So far, so good. It is a gloriously hot day in North Texas. So I'm glad to be on the inside.
You guys burning up. I'm in Florida and it's cooler here and it's over here.
So bad.
It's so crazy. But yeah, so we had Miguel on was probably late last year. You're on with Aisha Hollins, another friend of the podcast. So we were talking about your upcoming project. So the Making It Make Sense, the it being IT, information technology. So again, great, clever title for a podcast. So I want to do some catching up. I want you to introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background and what have you. I didn't do my due diligence. So Miguel is a cybersecurity and GRC evangelist for Armor, as well as he is a retired supervisory special agent from the FBI. So you did about 2 decades, if I'm correct.
A little over that, yes.
There it is. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So whoever's listening, please stay tuned. The rigmarole I always have to knock out. So please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If there's a bell involved, hit the bell. Please follow Miguel as well through all of his social medias that will also hit as we go through the conversation. Yeah. But yeah, just continue to tune in. Greatly appreciating because you keep giving me great guests as long as you keep hitting up the channel. So without further ado, I give it to you, Miguel.
Wonderful. So Miguel Clarke, I am a retired supervisory special agent from the FBI. I did 23 and a half years in the FBI, started in 1998, and I did what all FBI agents in my day wanted to do. I started on the violent crime squad, jumping out of moving cars, working bank robberies and putting bad guys in jail. Everything that you would think that an FBI agent does, I did for the first 2 years. So after that, I moved from there working drug cases. And interestingly, I learned the FBI does not actually work drug cases. The FBI works criminal organizations that happen to traffic in drugs, because we love working organizations in the FBI. So I did that for about a year, and I joined the Cyber Squad almost 25 years ago now. So right at the beginning of August, I came into working computer intrusion type work. That was August of 2000, thereabouts. And I didn't have any formal training, but I had always been what people would consider to be a computer geek, I guess you could say. And I mean that I'm self-identifying. So I mean nothing in the pejorative sense to anyone listening here, right? It's like, yeah, I can call you a geek, get permission before you call somebody a geek. All right. So moving forward, I built a bunch of computers in the early mid-90s, primarily to play video games. That was the only reason why I built a computer. I bought a computer and then I'm like, this doesn't work. And this is back in the old 486 days of moving into Pentium, for those of you who are keeping score at home.
Wow.
So there's that. Worked a bunch of computer intrusions, criminal computer intrusions in the early 2000s, and I started working national security computer intrusions with Lockheed Martin victim for the Joint Strike Fighter case. And that really just introduced me into the crazy world of nation state-sponsored computer intrusions and just how ridiculous that can be. So various other things, including being a program manager up at headquarters and getting to visit the Pentagon. That was pretty cool. And let's see. Some counterterrorism in there. I was a supervisor for Crimes Against Children Squad for a little while in there as well. And then like the last 3.5, 4 years of my career, I was working corporate outreach. So I was effectively I was paid to answer off-the-record questions about cybersecurity and risk anytime someone from corporate America would call and, hey, let me ask you a question about a hypothetical situation. So it was like a light version of consulting, penalty-free, completely safe, Stone, Chatham rules. So I did that up until I retired at the end of 2021. And so basically, I'm here now, right, in the private sector. I guess that's the other side of the firewall in a way.
No, absolutely. And you have a storied background. Like there's so many questions that you probably can't answer. I have so many questions.
You know what? Ask your questions. Because it's not that you can't answer. I think that most of the FBI agents or, folks in the FBI who say that they can't answer questions, they probably just lack creativity or the will to be creative. There are things that you can say. Usually the things that are the most protected are how you know certain types of things. And so we will just avoid revealing things that would illuminate or elucidate some capabilities that the government has that maybe they don't want anybody to know about just quite yet. So
no, that makes sense. So with your background, right? So you made the transition based upon your aptitude. So it was something that you were, kind of doing at home, so to speak.
Yes.
So was it a matter of you asking for the transition, or was it like they were like, hey, we need someone with these skills, and we know that you're the resident, like you said, quote unquote geek?
Okay, so a little insight into the FBI. No matter how cool it seems being in the FBI from the outside and the inside, the culture is a little bit different. And I imagine it's a lot like the military, where they want you to be thankful for the opportunity that's in front of you. And they're really not concerned with the individual skills. We used to say growing up in the Bureau that agents are fungible. So if you're an FBI agent, they'll just grab you and assign you to a task, and they don't really care what your skills were. So that's what happened to me. My late supervisor, special agent in charge, Danny Deffenbaugh, was just coming off of probation because FBI agents, when they graduate from Quantico, you have, everything you learned during the academy, you learn, but then they expected back then for you to take 2 years and just basically do on-the-job type training. And so I did that, and I was coming to the end of my 2-year probationary period, and he sat me down in his office, the special agent in charge, and he asked me, hey, what do you think of being in the FBI so far? What do you, are you enjoying it? Do you like being a special agent? And is there anything that you want to do? And I said that I was loving it, was great, living the dream, which I was at the time. And I said, yeah, but I used to build computers in my spare time. And, maybe some point in time, 2 or 3 years down the road, maybe even 4 or 5, I'd love to maybe learn something more about cyber and work cybercrime. And he stopped the conversation right then and there and said, we have a vacancy on the cyber squad. He picked up the telephone and he called some people and said, Miguel's transferring to the cyber squad. And it happened just like that. And so then I have to go back to my boss at the time and tell him that I got transferred because I answered the SAC's question honestly. So that was a very difficult conversation. I may or may not have gotten a tongue lashing for that one. So retired Supervisory Special Agent Steve Lester, if you're listening out here, I apologize again.
So what's interesting about it is, conventional military, right? I can only speak really for the conventional forces I worked with. That typically does not happen too much. Like you are whatever you've been trained to be to a certain extent. Like you are also a housekeeper, a babysitter, cleaner, a mechanic, all the above. But typically, you don't get to do anything cool in transition. There's certain circumstances, but what it sounds like is it sounds like the special mission units. So the SMOOs that we used to have visitors when I worked for some of the more interesting customers, right? JSOC and so forth. They would stop in and say, hey, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a radio guy or a SATCOM guy. I'm like, well, what do you want to do? That sounds more like more, and that was cool. We had a bunch of people who did go into that field, and they came out better on the other side of it. But it really is that make a phone call like, hey, we got an individual with the aptitude to do what we're looking for. So that's really cool, actually. Especially if you enjoy it, right? Like some people do get they bite off more than they can chew, but for the most part,
well, that's always the FBI. You always bite off more than you can chew, and from a culture standpoint, the FBI, at least in the 90s and early 2000s, the focus was always making sure that everybody who worked for the FBI realized that the FBI was bigger than any one individual, any one squad, any office, right? And that the mission was even bigger than the FBI. So there was just a lot of pride that was really instilled into everybody who worked in the FBI at that time. And you would never do anything that would embarrass the Bureau. And that's one of the things that we say, DEB, don't embarrass the Bureau. So any special agent that's out there would know, Deb, don't embarrass the Bureau. That it's almost penalty of death that you do that, right? Like you would get people that just would refuse to work with you if you were the type of individual who was an embarrassment to the organization. And it would be very, very difficult to be able to recover from something like that.
Got you. No, that makes perfect sense, especially with the line of work that you guys are doing. So with that being said, right, kind of to dig a little bit deeper. So why law enforcement in general? Like, why was that something that kind of pulled at you to go that route?
Interesting. I mean, I don't have a traditional story for anything that I do, and law enforcement was the same thing. The FBI was cool. I didn't know anything about the FBI. I made a joke about joining the FBI when I was out having. I may or may not have been having adult beverages with a very good friend of mine I've known since the 8th grade. And I may have made a joke about the FBI. I'm like, oh, I don't like what I do in sales. I went to the University of Kansas. I have a business major, and I was in sales working in the Kansas City area. And I'm like, no, maybe I'll just join the FBI. Well, a prosecutor out of Kansas, he heard me tell that joke, and he happened to be visiting Nebraska at the time as I was visiting Nebraska. And he came home and he called a prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office over in Missouri. And she called Roland Corvington, who was a supervisor at that time in the Kansas City office. And then like a couple of days later, I get a phone call at my job. This is the FBI. I heard you're interested in the FBI. Why don't you come down, take the afternoon off and come down and have a visit? And they just really kind of explained a lot to me that I was not aware of. And from that point in time, my interest was piqued. And they do sell the FBI to prospective new agent trainees by, do you have what it takes? And can you outcompete the other 99% of the people who want the job? Right. And if you think you can, we invite you to come to Quantico and put your money where your mouth is, if you will.
That's cool. And it definitely shows your flexibility and adaptability, right? Because a lot of people would have got that phone call and like, oh, and click.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're I like to say you're gold, right? Like, so we did the 4 lenses when I was in the military, and they had different personalities. So a person who is willing to take risk. So like out of all the colors, gold is my least of all the lenses, right? I'm very like I have to know 10 steps ahead. I always have to look before I leap. That makes you miss out on opportunities. So
yes,
you being no, it's not gold. Sorry, it's orange. Gold is task oriented. So you're orange. Okay. So orange is the person, the daredevil, basically. So you having that sense of adventure and what have you, what made you land on cybersecurity on the way out? Like, what made you say, okay, now that I've had the experience, this is kind of what I've been doing for some time. What made you take the leap to say, okay, I'm going to go into the field of cybersecurity, or is it adjacent enough to law enforcement where you didn't really feel like it was too much of a risk?
Well, it wasn't a risk for me. There were very, very few people who worked cybersecurity, computer intrusions going into the early 2000s. That was just new. It was novel. At one time, there were probably less than 100 people in the FBI who were working at those types of investigations. We had a guy in Dallas. We have a couple folks in Dallas that had a few firsts, like the very first swatting case that was successfully prosecuted was out of Dallas. So Dallas really was starting to punch above its weight class in the late 90s as it relates to computer intrusion and cybersecurity. We started, I think, the FBI's second regional forensics computer lab, because in those days, forensics it was not like a forensic science. right? So the forensics didn't have the same kind of rigor that you would have with, say, like fingerprints or, hazardous material collection type things.
Right.
It was different. And so having this brand new process, the Regional Forensics Computer Lab in Dallas was the second one that had gotten certified to the same level as any other forensic laboratory out there. So lots of interesting things happening in Dallas. I had some great coworkers who were all involved in doing some first things. The prosecutors that we had were absolutely top notch. One of the prosecutors had come back to become a United States attorney recently, wow. Aaron Neely Cox, Linda Groves. I mean, just these are like original gangster names from way back then, right? Nobody was doing these types of things that they were doing. So it was interesting to me, and having an aptitude for it and what other people at least saw as an aptitude for it, it was good for me. And I never really lost that. I never lost the interest. And in the Dallas office where I was stationed, spent most of my career, I would get asked cyber questions no matter what I was working on. So,
gotcha.
Yeah. And then working in the office of the private sector towards the end, that was the majority of the things that people asked about was cyber risk and cybersecurity, and what's the best way to either keep yourself safe or what's an appropriate response, and what does the government do to protect critical infrastructure, given that, 80, maybe 90% of it is owned privately and it's not owned by the government. So having perspective there, it just seemed like I could add the most value there.
So when it comes to the sharing of information, so being a pioneer within the field of, I guess it would be forensics in this case, how did that work? Like, was there a lot of different fiefdoms, where it's like local law enforcement, state, federal, the private sector, or was there a lot more collaboration, since you as well as the rest of the industry was just kind of figuring out how this thing worked?
So the answer to that question is complex.
Gotcha.
From 2000 to 2021, it changed. Right. Early on, really, it was the FBI's domain. And then you started to see Secret Service had some presence there as well. And then the lanes in the road kind of had gotten drawn. But in the mid 2000s, there was competition. Like, you wanted to get the telephone call. And so there are times where we'd show up and Secret Service was already there, or Secret Service would show up and the FBI was already there. And to say a rivalry is too strong of a word. I imagine it's probably a lot like what you would see between the Marines and the Army, right? And, just a little friendly competition between, both of those branches. So that was originally. And then soon we realized that there were more cases than anybody could work. And so then it was the opposite. Like, are you interested in this case, right? Like, let's let Secret Service work this one, or let's let the FBI work that one. And then we started to see some real guidance out of Washington, D.C. saying, okay, these are the cases that the FBI is going to work, not really by statute, but at least by executive direction. And so the FBI has the lead on all counterintelligence cases that are of cybersecurity nature. And the FBI has the FBI, Secret Service, and some of the other like DCIS. Let's see who else. Air Force OSI is another one. Army MI, not so much, because they didn't really have U.S. operations, but Air Force OSI and NCIS did. And if they had a Navy customer or an Air Force customer, then they would be involved as well, right? But we would have the ability to work with them.
Go Air Force. That's what I'm talking about.
Go Air Force, yes. Yeah, I love the Air Force, man. At one point in time, when I first started, when the Air Force really was getting into cyberspace, they realized, oh, well, there's space in it, right? In the name cyberspace. So they're just like, oh, that's ours now, right?
Yeah,
so 8th Air Force. That was 8th Air Force, right? They're like, hey, this is ours. We own this. And then somebody said, wait a minute, did we just allow the Air Force to basically co-opt an entire domain? Like, no, this belongs to NSA now. So then that at some point in time moved over. But in like 2004, probably through 2008, or maybe even, almost 2010, Air Force was really taking that lead, and 8th Air Force was the one that was responsible for doing that. If I remember correctly, that was General Eldar was the command for that. And then
Oh,
it ended
wow.
up
Okay.
it ended up going over to NSA at a certain point in time.
As I say, that was very early in my career. I'd say because I joined in 2003, so
Okay.
that would have been at the very beginning. I still was even doing cyber things at that time. I was a data maintenance guy, so
Nice.
circuit boards, crypto, telephone, things of that nature. So that's before I get
That stuff translates so well, right?
It
Like
does.
you see that you're doing very similar types of jobs as the things that you see on the other side of the world, except in many cases there's more pressure and higher expectations that are associated with that, and sometimes even danger, right? You know, in the private sector, I've yet been called to assist on a search warrant or an arrest warrant or anything like that. Hey, but if you guys are listening to this and you need me to assist on a search warrant or an arrest warrant, I'm happy to show up and help, even as an advisor, right? That'd be great.
There you go. Got to plant your flag. But it's very interesting how there's a lot of similarities there, right? Like it reminds me of the Goldwater Act, right? The reason that we have the USOCOM and the JSOC and joint anything is because of mistakes made by trying to separate by AOR or by platform, right? And since then, like if you look at a lot of joint Doctrine, before I left, right? I love Doctrines. Most boring stuff on the planet. So I watch it paint dry. But I find it fascinating because it's like you can see the foundation, how it's built upon, and then how it has to change, right? Things change, and so does Doctrine. It's just a very slow process sometimes. But what I always found fascinating was that after the incident, it was no longer about platform or service. It was about capability. It's like if for whatever reason, a sub or a ship could effectively work in this AOR that's predominantly, air power driven, and we'll do that as long as we get the right kinetic effects, right?
Exactly.
It's about what do we have, and how can we utilize it? And that always fascinated me. And also decentralized control and all that other good stuff that comes with it. So that part I do miss from the military. But the rest of the red tape I do not.
No, not at all. The administrative burden associated with anything that ends in .gov or .mil is incredible. For those of you guys who have never experienced it firsthand, it is a marvel.
Yeah. And but what is cool though is you do have those special, like I said, special mission units. You have the FBI, you have OSI, like you said, that have certain because they have a special mission. They're not like Airman Williams when he's conventional Air Force, where it's like, here's 1,000 jobs on top of your daily job. But then when you're working for people with a certain mission, sometimes that gets stripped away. So I really do miss that portion as well. So
yeah, you miss Doctrine, don't you? You don't have any Doctrine now. Like,
oh man, you run into stuff and you're like, I saw this.
It would be so easy, right? Like I miss some bureaucracy. I never thought I'd live long enough to say how I miss some bureaucracy, but you can walk in, it's like, where's the manual, right? You can go anywhere and you can find the manual for that. Job descriptions going back, maybe 100 years, this is the job, and examples for you to write from and write to. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to do it? Having that level of detail it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I do miss that. When I first came into the FBI, we had two huge books. One of them was the Manual of Administrative Procedure, the MAOP, and then it was the Manual of Investigative Operations Guide, I think, and it was like the MIOG. And so anything for any and everything that the FBI worked, every single violation, they would tie it to the law. And then there were the elements that you needed to prove, and all of it was there. Like it was everything that if you needed to get smart on any particular thing, it was there. You could read it. You knew exactly what to do. So when I first started making cases, I would actually print those things out from the violation, and I would just include them into my case file. So right at the top of the case file, it's like I knew exactly what the statute was that I was trying to to prove and to investigate. And then the other thing that they really hammer on that nobody ever really talks about is looking for exculpatory information, right? Talking to people and being an honest broker. Say, hey, if you didn't do this, let's have a conversation and point me in the direction of that evidence. If it's there, I'll find it, right? And I will tell the story honestly. This is what I know that you did. This is the context that I'm aware of. This is what you told me, and this is the information that you provided. And I'll represent that honestly in front of a judge. So yeah. It was fun.
Yeah. Like, do you get to do any of the cool guy stuff anymore, or is it more of the evangelist champion of said GRC and things of that nature?
So it's mostly the evangelist and champion
Which is
work,
still cool. Don't get me wrong.
I know, right? You just lost half your readers right now. They're like, that's why we tuned in here, right?
You're
Like,
just
we
not
tuned
locking
in.
people up.
Yeah. So yes, it's still cool. GRC is still cool. GRC and privacy is very cool. I like to enjoy what I do. And so I try to find stories that I can share with people to give them examples. Because the closest thing we have to Doctrine in the private sector is probably GRC, right?
Right.
It's like, here's the governance, here's what we need to do, here's why we need to do that. Our industry is rife with so many technologies that it's super easy for those technologies to follow the flashing lights. And before you know it, you're really just talking about features and functions and not talking about the so what, why do we need to do this? And so that's one of the things that I do find interesting, because I think we're at a point where people are really starting to conceptually grasp what the impact of information security or the lack of it and what that really means. And it is as critical to everyday operations as electricity, right?
Absolutely.
If we were to rewind, let's say 60, 75 years, we wouldn't probably have as strong a tie to electricity in the business context, right? If the lights go out, right, you can just grab the typewriter and you can still work, right? If the lights go out today, well,
loss of life.
Yeah, it is. It's done, right? You're not operating, right? You're not online. Your customers can't talk to you. But with that in mind, we don't have electricity crimes today, right? It's just part of business, right? You start to think about, how do I make sure that I literally keep the lights on, and you have a contingency plan in place for that. Operating in a financial environment, we live in and have always lived in difficult financial times, right? Where you can make bad decisions and bad financial decisions, and you can put your organization out of business. So they have rules. They have tools that they can use to guard themselves against like rising, prices rising and interest rates, or the scarcity of capital or something along those lines. But we don't see any of those types of tools or contingencies that are applied to cybersecurity. It's like we want to make cybersecurity its own dungeon, right? Its own, like you said, fiefdom. We used to call them silos of excellence in the FBI, right? So same thing. And it cuts across all of those, and it's not really being perceived as a business risk because organizations aren't handling cyber risk like financial risk, right? You don't see the same kind of detail in an annual report as it relates to cybersecurity as you would like business risk, and the tools that people have in place to minimize the impact of changing financial times.
No, absolutely. So, in my mind, because of your background and information that you do know, especially from a national standpoint, I can see you able to walk into a boardroom or talk to the C-suite and have them shaking their boots, right? To just break down, like, because you're not giving us the proper resources, here's the X, Y, and Z that could happen.
Yes.
To both you from a fiduciary standpoint as well as from a regulatory standpoint. Like, here's all the things.
I feel like they know these things already, though. Every time you turn on the news or you jump onto the internet, you see a new story about some other crazy thing that's happened and huge financial impacts. So I think that the board of directors, they know. They understand that they need to get better as far as talking about cyber risk, but there's just nobody to talk to them. Right. We've got technical folks, and then we have like really bright financial minds. So you've got these bright technical folks that understand how everything works. And then you have these really, really bright financial minds and folks that specialize and have the responsibility for governance for huge organizations. And there's no way currently no good way, reliable way to translate that conversation from ports and protocols and, infractions, incidents, events into financial, like this is the financial impact.
I've only been out for almost 2 years now, right? So roughly, I think it's been a year and a half. what I always have trouble connecting the dots with, because I spent half my life in the Department of Defense, right? Is the level of care. So when you're in like an organization like the FBI, the military, so on and so forth, you care about levels above you and levels above you, right? You're like,
Right.
okay, I understand a bigger picture, so I understand that if X doesn't happen or Y doesn't happen, or if we don't, stop Z, then there's going to be ramifications. There's second and third order effects. What I've
Yes.
been noticing from not where I where I specifically work, because they do have a national defense mission and what happens.
Yes.
But when I talk to some of my peers that are in companies that don't have ties to government, they have a very myopic view of this is my line of sight. This is my field of fire, and I'm not going to look left or right. I'm just going to go in this direction. Is that just something that you believe that we learned from the organizations that we worked for, or is it because of there's a greater mission involved, or is it just some people just don't have the awareness?
So I think it's all of those things. So a bigger mission, absolutely. But when you work for the government, you're aware of kind of like the conditions that you need to hit in order for progression to whatever that next level might be. So you know what, you're really interested now. Like, hey, I want to do this because one day I might be in those shoes, and I hope that, the lieutenant coming before me or the captain coming before me would do the same for me that I've done for these other folks. And, I if not, I'll show them, right? I'm interested in learning these things because I want to see that. And a lot of that, you get to see the impact of the work that's being done there, right? So, I've been the low man on the totem pole where, it's like, hey, just sit in this meeting, shut up, don't say anything, right? I've been that guy, right? And there's like 7-8 levels above me, the director of the FBI or, some 1-star somewhere. And I'm just like, just in the back. But you get to see how your inputs in many cases make that difference for whatever the mission happens to be. So it keeps you plugged in, it keeps you engaged. I think in the private sector, people really get wrapped around the financial aspect of it and the financial performance. That's the only thing that people really care about. And so we don't really talk too much about that. And unless we translate what we do into financial impacts for people and really start to think about that, I don't think that we're going to get any traction there. So if you look back, what is it? Is it like, I think it's CDK Global? I think So, right. So here's this company that last time I checked a week ago was worth about like 6.9 billion is what the revenues were. Right. And in no world is the person who manages professional risk for them going to say, you know what? Our impact in the industry at 6.9 billion is 280 billion, right? That is so much larger than their organization, right? But if half of the dealerships use their software, and if we had like 16 or 17 million cars sold through May, and then we kind of extrapolate that out, their software probably does have, like, that being down probably had a $4 billion impact for the week that they were down. Right? It's like, oh my goodness. But who would make that connection if that's your job to look at risk for your company? Who makes that connection and says, okay, yeah, I'm going to look beyond the walls, our 4 walls for our company and start to go in and look at, okay, now look at the entire industry, a $1.5 trillion a year industry, if you include manufacturing and you include like all, the sales of vehicles. Nobody's going to do that math. And that's the point. Right. Before we start, we're like, okay, this is what I think the impact is going to be or has been. Last year in the UK, Capita had a breach and they were saying it was going to be like 25 million pounds sterling is what the impact was going to be. And then earlier this year, they said, we're going to revise that to 106.6 million pounds of impact. That's pretty significantly off. Right. That's right. That's off. That's like shooting at the sea and accidentally hitting the moon, right? Like this should never happen. But time after time after time, you see this happening, right? Breach reported, costs associated with it, passage of time, and then like a significantly larger number that's associated with that.
Right.
And it's up to us, I think, on the cybersecurity side of the house to close that gap for folks, because we understand the connected nature of what we do.
But and from my perspective, it's going to have to be regulation with teeth. Like I hate to have to give things back to the government, because I'm like, we should all be able to be good stewards, to be good citizens. But in the case of not to keep beating up CDK, because they're getting beat up enough, but they're giving me great traffic. So between them and United Healthcare, a lot
Yes.
getting flooded, right? And I never pick topics based upon what I believe to be traffic worthy, because you just never know. On
Right.
top of, it might not be the latest and greatest, right? So I kind of just I've been beating up this company or that company a lot over the past couple weeks, but the CDK thing looks like it's going to be something. I didn't know what,
Yes.
and then we talk about it, and it just continues to blow up.
Indeed.
From there, you're like, okay, and we picked fortunately a winner in this race to the bottom. But at some point, there's going to have to be that not necessarily top cover, but thumb that comes down, in my opinion, only because of, like you said, it's gonna, like, it's up to us cybersecurity individuals. We need to be given more weight at the table, is my problem with it, because we're not necessarily in charge of the money, unfortunately.
No, not at all.
And that's the ultimate vote, right? So you say, hey, this is going to be a big problem, and you're like, well, how big of a problem? And you tell them, like, flat, will it happen? Like, and then there's a little bit of gamble in there. Like, they're hoping that they don't win the lottery in this regard.
Yes.
CDK being the pretty much sole source software solution for, like you said, 15,000 car dealerships, right, nationwide.
Yes.
Yeah, you hit the lotto, and now that damages your reputation. That causes you to potentially be liable for further litigation, fiduciary responsibility, and a hearing. Like, 'cause we love hearings here in America, right?
Don't we?
So now someone's going to have to go tell Congress, like, how do we mess this up? So I think it's going to have to come down to giving the weight of, whether it be the BISO, CISO, whomever, just a little bit more I don't know, just a little bit more weight.
That's so scary to me, putting the government in charge of
It
something.
is, because it shouldn't have to be that way.
I'm not sure that I've ever seen a situation that the government couldn't misdiagnose and then still apply the wrong remedy, right? Like, it's
right.
So here's a great parallel, and I just had shared something on LinkedIn earlier today, talking about the unintended consequences of some of the SEC regulations, and how CISOs are starting to kind of like leave the industry. It's like, this is not worth it. The juice is not worth the squeeze.
Right.
And so you have that as an unintended consequence.
They're getting the responsibility, but they're not getting the say so. Like, yours is going to be the person who takes the fall.
Yes, absolutely. And so there's a parallel with what you see in education now, right? I mean, if you have somebody you care about that's young, that's grown, he's like, don't go into education. Why would you do that, right? There's all these regulations, there's all this, and the compensation isn't really worth it. And until we start to flip that around, I don't see people going into the military. Military recruiting is down by tens of thousands.
Right.
And we're starting to see in cybersecurity folks having similar type of trauma, like they've been at war, right? People are just getting burnt out. The burnout is real, and they're just saying, "Hey, I need to step away from this." And I know a lot of CISOs are like, "I'm away. I'm not coming back." Right? At least not until things change. So yes, the threat of legislation, I think, is good, but I also think that helping CISOs convert what they do into dollars of impact, I think that's going to have a bigger impact overall. For example, if you have the ability to speak in the language of finance, and you can walk into any boardroom and you can talk about risk, and you can say, okay, here's what you're really doing. You've given me very little budget. What this means is that we will not be able to respond to a threat within 30 days. So you, board, have decided that 30 days, 60 days, 90 days is enough time for the adversary to run around the network. With impunity. And if you want better response times, you pay for it, right? I mean, it doesn't come for free. There's no such thing as a $5,000 used, 25-year-old car that'll do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, right? And if you get something that'll do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, getting from 3 seconds to 2.9 is way more expensive than going from 10 seconds to 6 seconds or from 6 seconds to 3 seconds. So chasing that last tenth is really, really a challenge. And so as we start to iterate towards that, those CISOs who can speak that language and do that will be so valuable. And so maybe that's another way we can combat that, from the top down, from regulation standpoint, and then from the bottom up, through the CISOs and really kind of knowledge sharing and becoming more fluent in the language of not just cybersecurity risk, but cybersecurity risk as a function of business value.
Right. I completely agree. And maybe that is the future, not only from an academic standpoint, but also from hopefully OJT, right? Because there needs to be a lot more of that within our field as well.
Yes.
Because it's great to come in with degrees and certifications, but it really is that experience. So
it is.
Having someone to be able to sit at the table and understand what does the C-suite need and how they understand this information will probably pay its weight in gold. But that's going to be some time. So time is moving by very quickly. So I definitely want to pivot to your company, what you guys are currently doing in your initiatives.
Yes.
And then I'd like to end on a lighter note. I did want to incorporate Tell Me a Scary Story. I want you to change the names to protect the people, and all the above. But I know I only have you here for a limited amount of time. So I definitely want to get in all the our questions and topics first, and then we'll see how much time we have left.
Okay, that sounds good. For Armor, we are we're a cloud-first cybersecurity company, and as such, we have, I think the most exciting thing we have right now is having launched Armor MDR. And that is our MDR offering, and it is kind of backed by the Microsoft engine, right? Microsoft is spending $1 billion a year for, the past 5 years on security, and they've got some really impressive tools that are there. And so Armor uses that to really help to add some context. And then we also have Defender that's a part of the solution now. We just did a launch. And so what that effectively means is for the things that, that the company agrees and are scripted, we can instantly take action against things that are concerning. Armor MDR technology, Microsoft technology, and the ability to respond to threats and incidents much, much quicker than just XDR, right? From a just XDR standpoint, it's a notification. And so what we really want to do is we really want to bring the idea that how you respond and how quickly you respond is how you start to experience better security, right? Better security is about response time, and it's not really about the technologies that are deployed or what you can detect.
No, absolutely. Because we have been seeing a lot in more recent news, just how long the bad guys are able to persist within the network, right? And our response time has really been encrypted us, so to speak. So it's good to see that is the initiative is to understand your environment better, the awareness, and then be able to respond much faster. Because I can go on and on about the beginning of this year, the end of last year, and then all of the minutiae in between. But what we've learned over the past, I'd say 4 years since the podcast started, right around Sunburst, so the SolarWinds incident, is that it really does come down to the mitigation of risk, and then your response to when bad stuff happens. Because unfortunately, regardless of how well protected your fortress is, there's always a chance that you could be susceptible. So how do you respond to that? What is your business continuity plan, your disaster preparedness plan, things of that nature? So it's good to see that you guys are definitely taking up the mantle and pushing that initiative forward.
It's difficult because people don't want to hear that they paid for security and they could still get breached.
And that's the hard part of explaining to people. Like it really is. You're trying to make yourself a harder target, so they go find a softer target.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, if it's a nation state actor or someone who's just highly capable, has disposable money and things of that nature, they're out there, unfortunately, and that's kind of their modus operandi, is to try to squeeze industry. So
Yes.
yes, we are all susceptible, but do you have the proper preparation? Like, like you say, Batman, all he needs is prep time.
Yes.
So are you prepared for when, the bad guy does show up? And are you able to quickly mitigate those circumstances, because time is money?
So people still don't really seem receptive to it, right? I think there's some reporting that's out there. I'm not sure with the source right in front of me right now, but something like 66% of organizations don't actually make any changes to the security after a breach, right? And the same reporting says that you're like 27% likely to have a breach in any given 18-month period, right? So if you extend that math out, by the time you get to 5 years, you're somewhere in the high 90%. And when you get to 6 years, you're at 100%. Right. So, from a statistical standpoint, you should expect to have a material breach every 6 years. Right. And if you haven't had one in the past 4 or 5 years, well, right, like you should be prepared for that.
Right.
I don't know. A few years ago, I started thinking about it in terms of when we were at Quantico, and they were helping us to develop a capability to arrest people. Like, what is that? Right? Like, I can say stop or I'm going to arrest you, but if I can't make you stop, oh, okay, right. Everybody's got an opinion. So you ask people, then you tell them. And then if they don't do what you tell them to do, then you can make them do what needs to be done. And this is kind of where we are right now, I think, in cybersecurity, is that organizations see security as preventative measures, and they don't see cybersecurity as their executive authority to impose their will on their networks before the adversary can impose, his or her will on their networks, right? And if that sounds very military, yeah, right? That's where capabilities, when we start thinking about capabilities, America says, you shouldn't have done that. Well, that's because, right, like when .mil gets involved with something, you're like, it's going to be a display of force.
No, absolutely. And I think it's a mindset that I think will slowly change over time because of all of the CDKs and OPMs and SolarWinds. I think people are becoming more aware. Like my children understand it, but then you have, as you move up in the age, we start to see that people just don't really grasp it because either technology came to them later on in life, or they just are not really tuned in or plugged in or necessarily care. But my son cares because he plays a game called Roblox, and they give him ads and they let him know, like, be careful, stranger danger, they will steal your Roblox. They will get your account banned, things of that nature. There's skin in the game at that point, and that's just something that we didn't really grow up with.
Yeah. It's hard to get people to really care about it, though. And part of that is the problem is so big that, you almost don't worry about it, right? Think about, I don't know, in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we were all concerned about like a nuclear war. Right? So we used to hide under our desks, right? Yeah. We're going to get under the desk to protect us against the nukes. Yeah. Right. At a certain point in time, we realized we're like, okay, that's pointless, right? Like if there's going to be a nuke, then it is what it is, and I'm not going to worry about that. And the last time I checked, cybersecurity industry is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $250 billion a year. So that's all. Right. And about 40% of that is education. And the rest of that are like services and technology. And if you believe that cyber crime is its own industry, well, now we're talking about, $7, $8, $9, $10 trillion. Right. We're not going to spend our way out of that problem. It's not possible. So I think people are just like security via obscurity is still somewhat effective. Right. We got the government that operates deep web networks that nobody even knows are there, right? You can't see them. You can't talk to them unless you have the right hardware. They're just not there for you.
Right.
Right. So, taking this mindset of being safe because nobody is interested in targeting me is probably the most commonly held misconception that I've run across in more than 20 years of working computer intrusions.
Absolutely. So I use the analogy of the stagecoach robbers from, the Western days.
Yes.
Because you don't need to be a hacker, you just need experience. You just need to have the will to continue to learn and train. It has to be something that appeals to you. You don't need a degree for it. You don't need certain backing for it. These things will, exasperate your situation, but on offensive cyber, you need degrees and certifications, and you have to work your way up the chain. The bad guys don't do that. It's just it's a cash grab.
Yeah, it is that too.
And it's just, you have to think of it that way. Like, hey, I need to be prepared for when they come knock on the door, because for them the risk is somewhat minimal,
Right.
And the reward is outstanding, because you have people paying millions of dollars, and like you said, they don't even fix the back door that was open. They just give them the money and say, "Hey, thank you," and then they come right back for the back door.
Change Healthcare, the subsidiary of United Healthcare, I think they paid the ransom.
Yeah, that's what we suspect as well. That's what we said. Yeah,
they're no better off.
They paid the ransom, and then that's just you just fed a stray cat. Now your rival or your peer or whatever, they're gonna attack them next.
Yeah.
They're like, the money is good here.
It is. So the way I see it, and kind of what we learned in Quantico, they didn't put it exactly this way, but I tried to encapsulate it. So you have, mindset, skill set, and then the tools that you use. And I think it's going to be an intersection for all three of those things. Developing that right kind of mindset. That was one of the things we talked about in Quantico when going through the FBI Academy. Having a winning mindset, a survival mindset.
Right.
Because sometimes if you're in a dangerous situation, maybe you're severely injured, your will to live might be the only thing that keeps you alive, right? So you have to have that mindset. And then we train to be able to stop people from doing things, whether it's firearms training or hand-to-hand or wrestle or whatever it is.
Right.
We have a capacity to be able to make people stop doing bad things, right? And then the tools, right? Yeah, I mean, when you're in the FBI, you're thinking, oh man, this is a pretty cool gun, this is great. And then you get in the private sector, like, yeah, people spend 10 times as much on guns as what we do, right? All the Gucci guns are not in the military, and they're not in the FBI. So yeah, I mean, we have our work cut out for us.
No, absolutely. But it's great to see that you, as well as Armor, are there, fighting the good fight and trying to make it at least an educational experience for your clientele, your consultant, and things of that nature, to try to turn the tide, because there is a lot of misconceptions, and I think, like you said, people have they believe that they're okay, they believe that they're safe and what have you, but. I mean, not to be all doom and gloom, because I do believe that we are doing better, right? We're starting to make strides and what have you. But again, the bad guys don't require as much. They don't have red tape.
No, they
just
don't
go about doing bad things. So we just have to be a little bit quicker. And I think that this was an awesome conversation about how do we get there, right? Like you said,
Yes.
How do we mitigate those circumstances? How do we recover quickly? Things of that nature. So no, I think you're fighting a good fight.
It's fun. We also have Armor started as Firehost, right? So firewall and hosting and secure hosting.
Okay.
So for organizations that are saying, hey, look, we want to outsource this risk to somebody else, right? So if it's maybe payment processing or maybe critical health related data, and we can't afford to hire our own SOC and spend, $1.5 million a year for 24/7 and varying amounts of quality work that you have there. It's like, we're going to pay somebody to do that SOC as a service. And, we want somebody else to host it. If you see a problem in that environment, you can mitigate that. And we have years and years of doing that type of experience, that kind of work for our customers, Armor Cloud, Armor Enterprise Cloud, and having agents that can be deployed, to protect different workloads. So those are all things that Armor's doing. And so now customers just have to decide, right? Do I want to bring in a security system, if I will, into my environment? Or do I want to move my environment into something that's a little bit more secure? And we make those types of decisions every day in our lives, right? We have a certain amount of cash we carry with us, and we have the rest of the money is usually in a bank, and there's some level of protection there. And it's that same concept. And I try to make all these cyber things, align to concepts with how we do things in life, because we naturally mitigate risks for ourselves, whether financial risk or physical risk. We naturally do those things every day in life.
And that's real application, like to be able to break it down again. So we need more people in this space that are able to do that, because that is not only great client facing, right, to the customer and from a consulting standpoint, but also for the people who have the purse strings. So and that's really what it comes down to. So no, that's great. So before I let you go, before I let you off the hook, I did want to ask. I know I'm going to have an audience question, something similar. So if someone wanted to make the pivot now, right, in the 20s, the roaring 20s that we're currently in, if they wanted to make the pivot, so two questions: if they want to make a pivot from law enforcement into cybersecurity, what kind of pathway could they use to make that to bridge that gap? And then what about vice versa? What if there's someone who's in cybersecurity and they want to make that pivot into law enforcement, because you do see a lot more ads for FBI and what have you for cybersecurity agents, so to speak?
Yes. So if you're at a point in time, nearing retirement, and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about a career change, the application is definitely there from a mindset standpoint. Get used to being more collaborative than you've been in the past, right? The FBI, most law enforcement, the law and the courtroom is our customer. It's not the people, if that makes sense, right? So we just are there to collect evidence and to bring that evidence to trial. And then that's where the people get to see it. But we don't do as good a job in the FBI of really providing information to victims about the status of the case. And, we've gotten a little bit better, but it's not, the FBI is not a service. Law enforcement is not a service that's run to help you with cybersecurity. It's there really go chase bad guy and bring consequences to bad guy. So understanding that, while then still being able to leverage the intelligence portion of the information that we collect and then make that available to not just victims, but to the private sector as a whole in order to be able to protect critical infrastructure. That's important. So I think that law enforcement is continuing to grow in that direction. And we just ask for, and I would ask that people just be understanding as it relates to that. So that's kind of one question. Transitioning to the private sector, always going to be difficult. You're around a whole bunch of go fast, but people who were, when I went through the FBI, the top 1% of the people who applied. And you're going to go into a different field and it's going to be different. So an example real quick. I've been on a range shooting guns so many times, right? I'm so comfortable with that, it doesn't bother me. But one of the first times I went to a civilian range and I started to hear gunfire and the primary firearms instructor hadn't called for any shooting. I was looking around, I was like, what's wrong with those people over there
right.
shooting their guns, right? And so that structure that's provided, having everybody pointing in the same direction, all doing the same thing on the same mission, you're not going to have that. Right. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and that's okay. So just understanding that's one thing. So those folks that are in the private sector right now and they're interested in going into law enforcement, especially so they can get some experience from a cybersecurity context, I said, absolutely go do that. Right. That is, I think, an ideal path for people who are interested in cybersecurity to go in. Air Force OSI would be towards the top of my list. NCIS would also be up there. Of course, FBI, Secret Service, all have a mission there. Having the law enforcement piece means that you get used to making cases and you start to think about things very differently. And as a result, your thinking becomes very clear and you become, you're able to defend your ideas a lot easier. And I think that's one of the things that people have told me is interesting about me and my approach. The other thing is you have adversarial conversations as well. And so you realize that sometimes people don't want to give information to you, and it's still your job to collect that information, and you don't get to do that physically, right? So you have to be persuasive. You have to listen, right? You have to there's just a whole way to interrogate folks that you will learn in the FBI, and that will help you in future negotiations, and that will help you in really talking to others. Plus, I think you'll develop a confidence that maybe you might not have if you're just in cybersecurity, right? That being forced to do these other physical things and go out and interact with other individuals, sometimes in a physical way, it develops a confidence because you become more competent. right? So that competent leads to confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great answers. So I know I said I was only have two more questions. You piqued my interest on a third question. So we talked about it yesterday, actually. So we batch record on Sundays,
Okay.
and then Ask a CISSP is recorded usually on Mondays. So behind the scenes for audience.
Yes.
He kind of stumbled on. We're trying to figure out what makes a cybersecurity negotiator. Is that someone who comes out of law enforcement, or is it someone who's specially trained in cybersecurity, or both?
I think negotiation and crisis type negotiations are different, and there's the whole gamut that's associated with it now, right? If the idea is simply to facilitate payments and get that to work, anybody can do that, right? When you're thinking about negotiations from the context of a government is going to take some action, then I would say, yeah, there's something that's there. But in most cases, I think there's not going to be any government action that's going to be taken. There's not going to be any action by the company that's going to be taken. It's just, let me figure out what's the right dollar amount, and let me figure out how I'm going to get the money to you, and then what's going to happen. What's the format that I'm going to get? The materials back.
Right.
So I think that it's much more open when you're talking about negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of these days, I'm actually going to sit down and try to do an entire episode on it because there's a lot of stuff that happens in the background as well, right? You have brokers, like people who actually take the money in third parties, and it's crazy.
There's no guarantee that they're honest brokers either. They don't need to be honest brokers.
Right.
One of the very first prosecutors that I work with said, "Hey, if you're going to put the devil in trial, you're going to have to go to hell to get the witnesses." Right. And it's that same idea. You're dealing with folks that have decided to monetize an organization's weakness. There's no guarantee that they're going to be honest brokers, and they don't have to be. If you don't have the capability to stop them, like make them stop. So if we develop those capabilities, that I think will be different. And we saw that, I think it was Colonial Pipeline, right? When they had Colonial Pipeline, the government was like, we think let me tag me in, right? We're going to show you what the United States government can do. And so by and large, people were like, okay, we're not going to mess with America's oil, right?
Right. So you do a lot of things, but you don't mess with their oil.
Americans' oil? Please.
That's hilarious.
You want to be the main character in your okay. All right.
Yeah, you had Americans running around with trash bags full of gas. Like it literally made us go insane. That's how bad it was when Colonial Pipeline was hit. So craziness. So before I let you go, I know that you are an avid gamer, right? So we kind of on it on the other side of the firewall, and we were talking about, I think, Diablo and what have you.
Yes.
I never. So I was waiting for us to have another conversation to get your game tag. You have this goes on here. I'm going to get from you later. But,
we'll get it.
But I definitely want to sync up because my son tried to put me on Diablo, and I played a little bit. I played as a barbarian. I call him Ryrarian or something like that. I don't know. I was being corny. It didn't click for me because it's such a lonely world, and I think it's good. You have to play with friends. I was just running around, just smashing people, doing my yells, spamming button, and like 3 hours later, I caught up several levels, and I was just like, yeah, I'm done. So what are I guess I should say, what is your favorite game, and what are you currently playing?
So I haven't really had time to play very much, but I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. Okay. So the latest Final Fantasy, it just come out, like it's Final Fantasy VII, like Part 2.
Oh yeah, Rebirth. Yes,
Rebirth.
I'm in that right now.
It's a fantastic game, and in the past 2 or 3 years, I played the second God of War, Ragnarok. That was fantastic. It's one of the first. Second game I platinumed, like everything. I did everything in that. It was a lot of fun.
I did not. It's so much stuff.
So much stuff. So there's that, and then Helldivers, but they had a recent misstep, right? That was Helldivers 2 is a great game, and then like 90% of the players are gone. So gaming, going out to the range, firearms is also fun, and photography. Those would be the things that I enjoy the most when I'm not doing cybersecurity stuff.
Okay, so then I can use this question 2 ways. What are you currently shooting?
So, of course, 9mm, which recently now is good enough for any problem that you'll have, right? And I have a Shadow Systems MR920. Just that's kind of my daily carry. I also have an FN 509C tactical that I like as well. That was a retirement gift from the missus. So that, and of course, a freedom loving AR, right? You gotta have that.
Freedom loving. I like that.
Yeah, it is, right? Tell me you're an American without saying you're American. Look at a picture of my AR. So yeah, I'm a Texan at that, right?
Right.
So that, and then I'm also a Nikon shooter as well.
Okay.
And I like, prime lenses, and I do enjoy shooting, people, but not portraits and weddings anymore.
Gotcha.
Right. So just go out and look for things that are interesting, travel, just really kind of being out, and then just enjoying the wonderful things that I have the ability to see.
That's awesome. So you said Nikon. Okay.
Yes.
I think that's the only real camera I ever owned was a Nikon. But I've never been an avid photographer, but I do enjoy, like, if I see something, because I did travel a lot when I was in the military. But yeah, I'm just an iPhone guy now. Like, I know it's a shame.
It's good enough.
They have bad cameras.
It's good enough. I mean, if you decided that, hey, look, I'm going to start a project, and at the end of this project, that you're going to end up with this, 40-page album that's going to be filled with pictures of your kids. And then when they graduate from college, it's like, here it is. Then that's different, right? If you have a project in mind, but for the most part, for most of the stuff that we do and the way we consume media, the iPhone's great. It has been for probably 4 or 5 years.
Got you. Okay. So I don't feel that bad then, right?
You should not feel bad. Don't let anybody make you feel bad.
A 16 Pro Max Ultra, whatever they call it, right? That's my plan, is to get one of those.
More than enough.
Yeah. Okay. So no, that's great. And so you said Helldiver. So your system of choice is PS5?
Yeah, I've got an Xbox as well. And I played a little, what was it? I can't remember. It come out last year. This time it was supposedly a big Bethesda game, and it was fun-ish for a little while.
Starfield.
Starfield, yes.
Yeah.
But if you leave it to me, and if I could only have one system, it'd be a PC. And I would play like Dawn of War, Command and Conquer, and StarCraft, right? Like, I really, really enjoy the real-time strategy games. Get together with a few buddies and do that. But those games are just dead, right? Nobody plays them anymore. I think the companies think that we only care about mobile games now.
Yeah, I think that is the trend. I mean, that's the biggest player base. But Civ is making a return, though. I did see Civ, I guess 6 is coming out, but Civ 5 still has a pretty popular fan base. I've never been good at a Civ game. I never make it very far. That's a game where you have to, like, really devote yourself to learning the keyboard. I just never really got down like that. However, I'm starting to convert now that Game Pass is on PC, and a lot of the PS5 games are starting to come to PC.
Yes.
And my wife got me a super ultra wide for my birthday.
Oh, nice.
So now, I can't, like, if a game has that capability, I have to play it on this monitor.
Of course you do.
So, like, now I'm starting, she converted me a little bit. So now I'm starting to get more and more into PC games. So I'm not sure if that'll stick necessarily. I have to see when the 50 series come out, how much they're going to be.
Yes.
Because I have a 3060 right now, and it works, right? But I can feel they're upgrading the next year or two, right? So it just depends on what those prices look like.
Well, the RTX, and then, they have, like, the AI frame rate fill, whatever. I can't remember what they call that. Like, NVIDIA's version.
FSR, as well as, I forget what the NVIDIA's version is, but DLSS.
DLSS, that's right. Yeah. Like 3.0 is out. And so, there's a lot of really cool things. Once you get a taste of the PC thing, you'll see something cool and you're like, it's only on PC.
And it's just started. I never had the itch before, but I played Hellblade 2 on it, and I was just like, it's the prettiest walking sim ever. Like, I can't believe it looks like this. I'm not doing much, but I can't go back. But I definitely have your gamer tag offline. But thank you for sitting down with me. Is there? I always ask everybody, is there anything I did not cover? Right? Is there a question that you haven't been asked that you wish somebody would ask? Is there anything that's like you're like, man, it would have been even better of an interview had I been asked this question?
So as opposed to answering that question, I will say this. Like I threatened to last time. Last time I threatened to come back on the show. So I'm just going to threaten you with me coming back on the show, and we'll ask the questions at that point in time. So, if you like and subscribe, and if you've enjoyed the time that we spent here together, and you're like, hey, I have some questions, or I'd like to ask something, I'm definitely willing to come back on and have another conversation. You guys don't know, but, Ryan and I have known each other for a year and a half, and, I consider him to be a friend. So if people want us to come back and to have another conversation, then let's do that, right? I think having more conversations about cybersecurity and just like people, leadership, I think those things are really, really important. So I'm always going to want to be a part of those conversations with you and others that want to have them.
No, absolutely. I greatly appreciate that. And like Aisha says, you're a great storyteller. So next time I have you on, I definitely want to hear a scary story. Like, tell us something we're
Next
like,
time.
man.
Next time, indeed.
Okay. Well, definitely continue to tune in. Definitely hit up all the websites that go by our names, either the other side of the firewall, the other side of the FW, or Ask a CISSP. Hit me up on pretty much any social media platform you can think of under Rai Security Guy, or one combination or another of the show. And then help us to get to 500 subs, what we're going for hopefully in July.
Yes.
We almost made it in June. We did plus like 80 subs. I did definitely, the push was great. We're still like 70 short. So if you can get that, that'd be great. Just go ahead and subscribe if you can, and then we want to hit 1,000 by the end of the year, so we start to do more with the website. But if you want to find Miguel, where can they find you, sir?
Yeah, I'm Miguel Clarke on LinkedIn, so pretty easy. And you'll probably see a picture of this mug. Don't let anybody tell you that Miguel Clarke is a Latino guy. I am a Latino guy. I just don't look like a Latino guy. So look for my mug here. I may or may not be smiling. If I have my FBI picture on, then I probably won't be smiling. But it's me. Connect with me. Tell me where you saw, where you heard from me, and then I'll be happy to link up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you again for coming on the show. It's always a great time, and I can't wait to get you back on to again tell some of those scary stories and just go a little bit deeper into what you're doing at Armor and
Yes.
Everything else. So again, continue to tune into all the stuff. Like, share, subscribe. Got a newsletter that comes out every Friday. Subscribe to that as well. Stay safe. Stay secure.